Okay, so I thought I would start off by telling you guys a little bit about how I got started on this topic. So I'm a consultant, I work for Excella, and my client for a long time was USA Jobs, the federal government's job board. So they have about 20 million account holders, and we embarked on an 18-month redesign of the site. And for plenty of contractual reasons, we were taking the site down from a hosted vendor and moving it to an in-house product. So there were plenty of challenges with that. But so we worked for 18 months to redesign the site. I had my PMP, I was a Scrum Master. We were doing really well. So 18 months later, the project was delivered on time, on budget, and with the required scope. And we were so excited. And then we launched. And it was a disaster. So for a variety of reasons, the public hated the new site, even though it had kind of the same look and feel as the old site. So they started posting to Facebook, posting to Twitter. It was so bad. We got like an influx of help desk tickets, and it was so bad that the director of that agency was asked to come to Capitol Hill to explain what happened. So all of this really has shaped how I feel about products and what that sort of Agile experience should sort of look like. And so I really went on this soul-searching mission to figure out what was missing in this whole experience. So I've come up with a couple of beliefs. And I believe that working software is useless unless your customers use it. So they really need to like the experience that they get with your software. And everyone can understand their customers better. So that's a little bit of what I'd like to talk about tonight. So first, I want to cover kind of some basics of product management, and especially as it's relating to lean startup. And then we're going to talk about 10 ways to get fat and stupid, and then 10 ways to put your product on a diet. Okay, so I thought maybe we could start off with a little bit of your own kind of war stories. So if you could just talk to your neighbor about if you've had any experiences similar to mine where maybe the project went okay, but then the product was a failure. So do you guys have anything? You can either shout it out or talk to the people around you.
That you want to admit?
Yeah, well, Capitol Hill was pretty bad. So do you guys, did you guys ever have an experience where the value issue was the hard part?
Yeah, I mean, I had experience where we built an awesome product and we use Agile, specification by example, like continuous integration, continuous delivery, everything. We did everything perfect. Unit testing, 80% code coverage, and no one wanted to use it. And essentially, you couldn't get any customers to actually use the system.
Yeah.
And there was a number of issues for them to onboard. That basically led to this awesome piece of software sitting there unused.
That sounds about right. So hopefully some of the stuff that I'll talk about tonight will kind of address challenges like that. So when I say product, I just want to kind of take a step back and talk about what I mean, because there's all kinds of definitions out there, and especially I think the product owner term can make what a product is a little confusing. So I'm specifically talking about a good or service that's delivered to market, and it could be a combination product. And specifically for software, it's usually going to be a service. You're providing software as a service. And so that product usually solves a problem and it adds value. But so I'm going to come back to this because even though I'm specifically talking about products, I think that this can be applied to internal tools, everything. So just another kind of background slide. So here's kind of the PMI approach to managing cost, schedule, and scope. But the product world is really focused on the customer, the market, and the business. So that's sort of trying to figure out why customers aren't using the software. That's really the problem that I wanted to solve. So I'm focusing a little bit more on those three aspects. It's really difficult. Okay, so again, going back to that internal tool discussion. So when I'm talking about internal tools, I really mean kind of problems that solve for an internal organization as opposed to customer problems. And so in an internal tool, you typically have some level of ability to exercise control over the process, although I think that we can kind of challenge that assumption. Whereas a product, you need to influence your user behavior in order to drive adoption. So, and typically internal tools will reduce costs, whereas products are to bring to market and add value. So a good example of that is going to be kind of the CRM implementation versus Salesforce.com. So if you work for Salesforce, you work on a product, but if you're implementing Salesforce, it's an internal tool. But so again, I really think that sort of this kind of product management approach can be applied across the board, but that's kind of the perspective that I'd like to take. So don't panic. Do not panic. So the Association of International Product Management and Marketing, AIPMM, they've put out recently, instead of having a PMBOK, they have the ProdBOK coming out soon. So this is the 7-phase life cycle that it's a stage gate approach to delivering products to market. So that you conceive products, you plan, develop, qualify, launch, and deliver, which I think is a confusing term because they really mean keep in the market, and then you retire products. And the first time I saw this, I panicked, don't worry. So we're going to come back to this a little bit more, but this is sort of the framework of how I'm kind of thinking about delivering products to the market, and that, you know, a product that's in market is kind of sustained in delivery. My project management training has certainly, I always love to like deliver a product and somebody else's problem, but that's really not what I want to, or how I've come to think about product and product management. So going back a little bit more to talk a little bit about lean startup. So this book by Eric Ries is sort of the foundation. For those of you who are a little less familiar, suffice it to say, it's kind of the lean is coming from kind of the same, you know, the Toyota lean, the Kaizen, continuous improvement approach to product management, and that this build, measure, learn loop is what we're constantly focused on in order to improve the product. So I'd really like to focus on what are some practical and kind of tactical examples of how we can apply this to our everyday products, even if you aren't a startup. So I really think that it boils down to 5 actionable steps. So you create your key performance indicators, you develop hypotheses, you test the experiments, and you measure the results, and then you pivot or persevere, as the saying goes. You either continue to go down the same path of those KPIs or you change course. So I really think that lean practitioners, they need to be both scientists and detectives. And that's going to kind of be the framework for all of these examples. So this is my attempt to kind of redesign in my head what the AIPMM framework, the 7-stage life cycle for a product would look like if you're applying Agile and Lean to it. So these vertical slices of you plan, develop, and qualify your product, slice after slice. And it's always about trying to measure what you're doing against those hypotheses that you're proposing. So that delivery phase, that keeping the product in market, you're able to continuously iterate upon that. So trying to get to this point where you're getting actual feedback from your customer is pretty important. So what is the value of all of this? Why do we really care about lean startup, and how is it applicable? So I think that there's a couple of things. Number one, it makes your process data-driven, or at least data-informed, and I think that's really important. So I really am pretty passionate about the data that's involved in this, so I'd like to talk about that. And it makes your product priorities pretty clear. So the process of prioritizing a backlog, it can be pretty difficult because everybody's got a stake in how it should be prioritized, and it's very difficult to figure out what should go first. So I really would like to take a data-driven approach to prioritizing that backlog. And I really think that when you do this, you can focus on what the actual value is. And we'll talk about 2 examples here. And in one case, that value was $60 million. And in another case, that was $1 million over 1 month. So I think that there are some actual results that you can see. So, and I'm calling everyone fat, whether you work in a large business, whether you work for government, whether it's an internal tool or an actual product. Everybody can do one thing, and I hope that there's one thing that you can take out of this presentation that you can do tomorrow, because I don't think it's as complicated as, you have to follow the precise steps. So everybody's fat, it's okay. So, okay, I thought maybe we could talk about, yeah.
A quick question on the data-driven aspect. So we're looking at integrating some systems that are kind of, we have a bunch of standalone systems that we're looking to integrate those now. I mean, how do you, what's a data-driven example in that case? How do you know which system to take first? Is there an example of that?
It's really going to depend, I think, on what your business and what your business model is.
There's no data, other than perhaps the usage. I mean, that's one of the data points. Some of the systems are used more than other systems.
Okay, I'm going to have to think about that example a little bit more.
Would it be driven by your enterprise architecture? To
Sure,
match to that
if you had
blueprint?
to.
I was going to say, should I ask the question, what enterprise architecture?
No, you don't.
No, we do
to
have
the
that.
blueprint? Yeah, to the blueprint, wouldn't that be there? Like the consolidation, God forbid, you could have AS400s or something like that. I'm just suggesting it. I'll just shut up now.
No, actually, don't shut up. So what I was hoping that we could talk a little bit about is kind of the barriers for organizations to sort of implement a lean approach, because you guys have heard me talk enough. So would you guys just go ahead and shout out what you think will be some of the problems, especially in large organizations and government? Yeah.
I guess referring back to his question, I would ask you back, what are you trying to improve by integrating these systems? What's the reason for doing that?
Well, they require maintenance, and they require different people to support them, and they're dying on the vine. That's part of the problem. They're older systems, and if we don't renew them, refresh them, they're not going to serve the end users at all.
So you have too many service calls, or the maintenance costs are too high, or?
Too many systems, too many independent, standalone, separate. One of them is actually a commercial system that was bought years ago, and there's no support for it anymore. So we're actually looking to replace and build our own.
I guess the point that I'm trying to get at is I would try to find what is the business value that's created by this particular integration product, and if it's to reduce, help desk calls, then you could measure that. You start by integrating two parts of it. Does that, produce any sort of reduction? Some measure of the maintenance costs and staff or whatever. But I think, if I get your
That sounds
point right,
great, yeah.
very much about what's the reasoning behind the project in the first place, and then that's what you have to end up. Sort of a generic answer, but.
Yeah, and if you're looking to sort of perhaps reduce total maintenance cost, that would be potentially complicated to measure, but that would be a measurement that you'd be interested in.
Right. I mean, if some of the maintenance costs are higher on one system and not the other one, then I would
Yeah.
choose the higher end maintenance.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you guys have any ideas about what other sort of barriers you might see?
Yeah, one we encounter a lot actually is despite the fact that it's data collected, it's still a personality or politically driven organization. So no matter what the data says, it really still matters what these certain specific individuals believe the data says.
Yeah.
Organizational change, capacity change.
Yeah, that's also good.
Management.
What's that?
Management.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so I'll just, you guys can check me, see if my answers are right here. So it seems like it lacks management control, the potential for the loss of user trust, the assumption that this is not relevant to B2B or enterprise tools, lack of requisite skills, especially when it comes to data collection. I think that there's a lot of BI challenges. And if we thought explaining Agile to our bosses was hard, this is going to be even harder. So cumbersome governance and enterprise architecture, how do you fit this in? And security concerns, especially when we start talking about using some of the software as a service tools that I'll reference later. So, and I think all of these challenges are legitimate. And I want to kind of dip our toe in sort of the lean world and see how you can right size or make this process fit to whatever kind of challenges that you have in an organization, whether it's governance or security. Like you too can do this. So now we're going to run through 10 things that will make you fat and stupid. So number one, you think that business cases are for suckers. I would love to not do business cases, but I think that this lean approach, it's going to help us change how we write business cases so that they're smaller, and instead of asking for the $100 million project, we're asking for a smaller amount project that has very definitive goals and objectives and results at the end. And that those results are going to help us deliver the next business case and get the next piece of the pie. So number 2, make wild changes in product strategy and call it a pivot. So I don't, oh, hey guys, we're going to pivot and it's cool. So I think that there's a lot of kind of new jargon that's out there, but I don't think that it makes us any more effective at what we're doing. So instead of the jargon terms that are out there, I think that we can really focus on making these data-driven decisions. So just be careful when people start talking in kind of these new lean lingo. Number 3, take pot shots at satisfying users. I'm going to talk a little bit more later about the process of exploration, and I think that's really important, but it needs to be a little bit more measured. So you just can't try everything and hope it works, but you need to be willing to try some different things and then hone in later on what actually is going to work. So number 4, forget to tie your metrics back to the business. So maybe it's good that you're doing metrics, but maybe your metrics aren't relevant to the business. So really focusing on what the business value is going to be super important. So number 5, putting your brand at risk. I think that this is going to be a really challenging part for some larger businesses, especially with in-market products. Like for USA Jobs, if USA Jobs had sort of done some A/B testing, I think that would have been very difficult for them because they had, congressional scrutiny over what's actually out on the site. Can job seekers find jobs? So even though they could have gotten value out of doing some A/B testing on new features, I think that showing different sets of product to the end user could have been problematic. So you do really need to be careful about brand, and I think that's going to be a challenge. So number 6, wait for the spirit to move you. And by this I mean, you can't bask in your collecting of data and hope that, something strikes you and you come up with the brilliant idea. This is hard work. So you really need to be that scientist and that detective in this whole process. So number 7, deferring action in favor of more results. So this is probably kind of similar, but eventually you're going to have to do something to your product, and so this does require quite a bit of tinkering. Number 8, make changes without informing leadership. So I think that for larger businesses, again, this is going to be another challenge to implementing. But if you're doing A/B testing and somebody doesn't know that the buttons have changed, that could be a big deal. So just really trying to make those kind of executives kind of part of the process, I think is going to be really important. So number 9, knowing better than your customers. So actually, I'll skip ahead to number 10 and I'll talk about them together. So number 10 is over-trusting your customers. So there's kind of a fine line here, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in terms of working with your customers and doing customer interviews, but you have to sort of know what's possible for your customers to experience, but then you also need to listen to what they're telling you. And so you can know a little bit more than them, but don't listen to everything that they say. And so just think about those two things together. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. How are we doing? You guys feeling okay about the 10 things to not do? Okay, so now we're going to do 10 effective ways to put your product on a diet. So again, I really think that you don't even have to use the word lean, but these are things that you can be thinking about all the time. So number 1 is listen to your customers. So I really think that, especially coming from a product perspective, it's really important to listen to your customers. And in the case of stakeholders, really value that stakeholder input and feedback. Talk to your customers in person. The big phrase now is get out of the building. So, talk to your customers, whether it's, going to Starbucks and asking people to take a look at a wireframe, or calling up actual customers, or getting that feedback from some sort of feedback tool on your site. I think that's really important. So, and do your market research. So again, if you're an entrepreneur, you should listen to those stakeholder problems. So a little bit more detail on that. So typically a stakeholder interview may be very directed, very process-centric, very specific. But I think that in the world of customer interviews, you can really broaden the scope of what you're asking your customers about, and really asking them some sort of general questions about how they feel about different situations and different problems, and really kind of getting their worldview and having that customer empathy. I think that's really important. So questions that you can ask are, what was it like when you did whatever, and another, yeah.
Oh, well, you can finish your point. I was going to, when you get through this, ask, when you had your launch and it was not well received by your customers, did you kind of go through some of the customer interview practices? And if yes, I mean, what did you find out of that? I'm just trying to tie this back to that great real example that you started with.
Yeah, so USA Jobs did, well, so when it was hosted by a vendor, USA Jobs, the feds, didn't have any access to sort of that behind-the-scenes information. It was very black box. And so when we finally got this wealth of information that just hit us like a wave, we were able to sort of collect feedback. It was a little late in the game because they were already hating it. So I'm glad I'm being recorded for this. Well, I'm sure you can go read about this in Federal News Radio. It was all over the place. But so we were getting help desk tickets that in some cases were very specific about what they didn't like. Many of us in the program office were even picking up the phone for these help desk calls. So it was all hands on deck. So we were getting some good feedback. And USA Jobs today continues to take in requests and ideas from Facebook, Twitter. They don't necessarily do man-on-the-street interviews, I think because, there's federal regulation around who you can talk to and how. But yeah, so my only other point on this slide was that I think that you can have a customer-led interview, so you hand them a wireframe or you sit them down at a computer and you ask them, what does this product do? And let them tell you, because I think that the opportunity for them to either walk you through their experience may be very different how you think it's going to be done. See if I can have a good example from USA Jobs, but I think for the USA Jobs folks, they had a hard time, or we had a hard time sort of understanding how users were actually using search. We redesigned the entire search page so that the results were going to have a little bit more detail. Well, it turns out they really liked only having, I want to see what grade this job is, I want to see the salary, and I want to see the title, and that's it. So they had to adapt very quickly to figuring out what the users actually wanted. The old one, the one that we did originally, looked pretty nice, but it just wasn't that good. Okay, so number 2, define and segment your market. So just, we always talk about, Agile smells. I think here are some kind of market segmentation and product smells. So if you're trying to solve all problems for all people, you're probably not doing it right. And if you have user stories that start out as, as a user, consider who that user is and what they're actually doing. So the second kind of caveat to that is if you have a user story that says and then you insert role here, as a sysadmin, well, that's not a good example, but, as a manager, that's a little bit better. But who is that user? What are they really trying to do and experience? And, really fleshing out kind of that detail behind why that user wants to do that. I think that's really important. So that's to the persona comment down here, so just things to consider when you're developing these personas, the geographic region of where that user's coming from, sort of the demographic profile and psychographics of who that user is, and beliefs and attitudes. And especially for software, I think tech savviness is going to be really important. So, nobody wants to, you need to be aware of how comfortable people are going to be with computers and software, and trying to make that experience as easy as possible so you can get them and some of their friends kind of adopting your product along the adoption life cycle. One consideration, by the way, for B2B products, it's going to be really important that you take into account personas that are both sort of the person buying the product as well as the person using the product, because they're not going to be the same. And even in consumer products, that's also important. I heard a great example from TiVo that they realized when they were developing TiVo that the person using TiVo is not the same person as the person buying TiVo. So the tech-savvy person at home would buy it, but maybe their spouse would be the one watching the TV and setting it. So maybe the tech-savvy person really liked TiVo, but then the non-tech-savvy person was the one using TiVo. So again, it's really important to kind of flesh all of those details out and be as specific as possible.
Could you explain what you meant by the chasm?
Yeah, so this is coming from Jeffrey Moore in his book, Crossing the Chasm. So his whole point here is that you want to get the early adopters on your product and before, and that their interest will kind of drive the motivation of the rest of the market in order to want to adopt your product as well. So, a good example would probably be the iPhone. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the really cool, hip people who liked technology products were the ones who had them, and now they're mass market. So it's that sort of the people who are most excited about your product are going to help you. They're going to be a little bit more forgiving in terms of what they like and what they don't like, as well as they're going to, when they do get excited, they're going to start kind of driving in almost a viral way, kind of the adoption of others in the market. Okay, so number 3, define your key performance indicators. So what gets measured gets done. So we have an opportunity to understand exactly what we want, and we can define it. And but I think it's really important to that the KPIs that we do pick, it really needs to reflect what your business model is. And I really recommend this book that just came out, Lean Analytics. It's almost a step-by-step guide based on what your business model is in terms of deriving what your KPIs should be. It'll help you really figure out kind of what your choke points are going to be. And it's going to be different for software as a service to e-commerce. And each one of these is going to have different things to measure. And there's even a section on internal tools and government. So I really think that this book is great. And just a good example here of coming from like the mobile app world. Actually, let me save that example. Oh, yeah, okay. So more on picking KPIs. So for the mobile example, don't settle for vanity metrics. This is the term of, for example, here's a vanity metric for you. Hi, I'm Joanna. I worked for USA Jobs. They have 20 million account holders. That's a vanity metric because who cares? Why is that important? What does that tell you about how much money you're making or how many users are actively using your product? And I think that especially for like mobile apps, that can be a really dangerous trap because I don't know how many times I've downloaded an app, looked at the first page and deleted it. So who cares if you have 20 million downloads? How many people are actually moving through that process of becoming paying customers or engaging with your product. So don't settle for just the easy metrics that you can capture. You really have to think very deeply about what's going to matter to your business. And I kind of think about it as you need to do the 5 whys for your KPIs, or excuse me, the 5 hows instead of the 5 whys. So, we want to grow our business by increasing revenue. Well, how are we going to do that? And then you sort of work your way backward into figuring out exactly what those KPIs really need to be. So 4 common ones that you're going to see from the product world are customer engagement, retention, conversions, that's going to be a little bit more relevant to kind of the e-commerce world, and the revenue per user. So just some 4 generic ones, but it's really going to depend. So then you want to take your KPIs and you want to develop hypotheses around them. So some examples here are, well, if we add feature X, that'll be more likely, customers are going to spend more time using the product, and so we're going to get more engagement, which is what we're looking for out of the product. So, or if we move feature Y to another place, users are going to find it more easy to use, and then they're going to use it, and so, then we get more page views or something. So, it's really kind of, going back to 7th grade science and writing your hypotheses. So I wanted to share this example here because I thought it was a really good way of you know, don't wait for the spirit to move you sort of message here. So this is coming from 1-800-DENTIST and ClickTail, and this is a heat map. And so we're looking here at where users are clicking on 1-800-DENTIST, and their kind of business goal was to get people to sign up for their service. And so this is the home page, and one thing that they noticed is that users are clicking really far down to the bottom of the page, and they're like what's down there? And they're kind of like looking for something. And so their hypothesis was they don't have enough information to sign up, so we need to add more information to give them the trust and the detail in order to go on to the next step. And so that's what they did. They added more information about the service down here. So that's a really good example of kind of coming up with those hypotheses and taking kind of the data that you have in order to become that detective. I would definitely call this detective work. So, and then you need to be able to translate those hypotheses into practical tests. So this is coming from Optimizely, which is an A/B testing tool. And somebody that I showed my slides to earlier said, I'm going to alienate half the audience by showing something from the Obama campaign. But it's just because they have good content marketing out there. So this is for everybody, not just Democrats. So this is actually from the 2008 campaign, and they had the goal of more conversions. They wanted more people to sign up to receive emails. And then they had an additional hypothesis of, well, if people are receiving emails, they're going to be more likely to donate. But they said, if we change this picture, and if we change this sign up button to something else, we might get more money out of it. So I don't have examples of the 4 pictures that they had, but it was, you know, Obama with his family, and then they had 4 different call to action buttons. So instead of sign up, they changed it to join us now, learn more, sign up now, and sign up, which was the control. So by making these 2 tests, they were able to raise an additional $60 million. So there's plenty more kind of data collection that had to go into that process, because you need to be able to follow the users down the path, the kind of from getting those emails through the content marketing process of getting and then coming back to the site and paying money.
Are you gonna come back and talk about tools like Optimizely?
We want to talk about them now?
Sure. Yeah, I just didn't want to interrupt you. So I was just curious. Are they mainly basically like a JavaScript tool you set in your site that allows you different users to have different experiences and they collect data on the back end?
Yeah, so in the case of Optimizely and a couple of their others of these software as a service, they actually have a WYSIWYG editor that you can make kind of changes on the fly. You can even have an analyst do it. You don't even have to be technical. Somebody just has to implement the JavaScript. But then there are other tools where you do need a little bit more developer intervention. Did that answer? Yeah. Any more questions? Okay. So we talked a little bit about kind of the exploration process. And so even though I did say that, don't just take pot shots, I'm going to retract that a little bit, because I do think that it's important to explore before you refine. And this is a good example. So here's the exploration process where you're trying out different avenues, and then you're able to hone in on what the best outcome is going to be. Whereas if you just start with an idea in mind and you continue to refine and refine and refine, you're going to miss the most optimal solution. So you do need to start with a goal, be creative and explore, be patient, because it is going to take time to kind of guess correctly in some respects. And you guys experiment early and often. And really take nothing for granted. And to add to that point, I would recommend that any assumption that you have, you document, because you're going to want to reconsider those assumptions. So this is just my idea of something that I think would make the hypothesizing process easier. So when you come up with a hypothesis, you don't want to lose track of that. So I really think you should be adding it to your user story card. So here's my example. So this is what I would imagine that Evernote did. So Evernote, it's kind of the productivity tool where I have a desktop app and I have a mobile app. And when Evernote added their mobile app, they decreased their user churn rate, the rate at which they lost customers, by 15%, which I think is really awesome. So I would imagine that they had a hypothesis around this. And so I would say that maybe their hypothesis was, so if users are able to sort of use the tools that are native to a mobile app, like uploading a photo, that's really going to improve their user experience, and they're going to want to use the tool more, and they're going to be more engaged, and that will eventually decrease the customer churn rate. So I've added my user story, so I'm trying to be as specific as possible. So as a business user, so I work with Jimmy, and Jimmy loves the iPhone app. And he loves uploading like photos from the whiteboard, so just take a picture and then he has all of his notes in one place. So that I can document whiteboarding meetings and keep them with my other notes. So there's my user story. And then so I want to also define how I'm going to measure that. So we're going to measure the churn rate of mobile users who take at least one photo. That's sort of my guess. So when we add this user story to our whiteboard, all of this needs to stay together. And then I think that the next step is going to be adding an additional lane into our Scrum board that says validated. So once we've implemented this feature and we're able to collect that data, is that user story, was it valid? Did it achieve the results that we were looking for? So, was your hypothesis right? By how much? And what did you learn? So even if your hypothesis is wrong, you still learned something through this whole process. So what is that? Okay, so number 7, get approval and buy-in for your A's and B's. So we talked a little bit about A/B testing. And I said before that I think it's really important that you kind of get those executives involved in having 2 different sets of content on your site. So I think it's super critical. So here are just some of the tools that are out there for A/B testing. You don't have to have experts to do this. Yeah?
What's A/B testing?
So it's coming from the marketing days where, we mailed catalogs to people, and you sent one set of catalog to the A group, and the same catalog with maybe a different cover on it to another group, and you see who bought more stuff. And so you can do this now with websites, with applications, with everything, really. But, yeah. And then that gives you a control group as well as kind of results on the new features. Any other questions? Okay, so release early and release often. So I got a question on what this picture is, and it's the Johnny Cash song. I got it one piece at a time, and it didn't cost me a dime. Do you know the song where he steals the Cadillac parts over the course of like 20 years, and then he makes a car out of it? So, okay, so I think that for having kind of a lean product approach, it's really important to avoid the Agile Big Bang. So, and in the case of USA Jobs, it was unavoidable because of contractual situations, but we spent 18 months trying to figure out this product, and then we got the customer feedback about what they hated. So if we were able to kind of get that a little bit sooner and perhaps in kind of a soft launch sort of mode, that may have really helped the situation. So, and I think that the second point that I want to make here is that you can inspect and adapt not just your process, but your product. So every time you do some inspecting and adapting, look, is this product meeting the needs of my customers? So start small. So, it's really important to learn from your exploration process. I think that especially with A/B testing, it's not easy to get it right, and you're not going to get it right the first time. So just really taking very micro examples and just seeing kind of what you learn and how much empathy for those users that you can gain little by little. And like a flywheel, you'll really be able to kind of harness that and make it more effective for you. But don't expect big things all at once, but really just be able to start very small and get comfortable with the tools and the process, and then I think it'll come a lot easier. And here's a really good example of how small things can really mean a lot. So this is the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund. So after the earthquake, they put together the relief donation, and this is actually the after shot, I think, of their website. But so first they added the photo, and that increased dollars per view by 1%. And then they added, they increased the font size, and that increased their revenue by 2%. And then they removed this security logo, and that was bad. That revenue down by 5%. Put it back on. And then so they got rid of sort of unnecessary field forms, like middle initial. Like, if you don't need it, don't collect it. So, and I don't actually have the number on that. I just know that when they removed all the excess fields, they saw an increase. And finally, the most important thing that you can do on your website is your call to actions. So that increased by 16%. And so if you have a button that says submit, change it today, please, because nobody knows what you're supposed to do except for submit something. So consider trying out different things that help express to the user what you're actually asking them to do. So in this case, it was support Haiti. And so all of these little changes added up to an extra $1 million in 1 month for Haiti relief. So small changes really do make a big difference. So, and to that point, as you're looking to start bringing this into your process, I think it's really important to, you can start doing this with products that are in market a little bit more easily than you can with new product development. So, so this is kind of the flow that I would start leaning out your process. So those that are kind of delivered to market, get your successes and start small there. And then as you're able to sort of build on that and iterate and become more effective, then you can start figuring out how to kind of apply these techniques to new development. So I think that's number 10. So I guess my kind of final point here is it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. So, I do think that, it's not just for startups. It's not just, you don't have to be totally lean to be lean. Everybody can be doing some of this at some point in time. So I really do hope that there's something that you can kind of take away for tomorrow or Monday. Oops. So with that, I would like to hear your questions, or also I'd like to hear if you guys think that there's kind of little slices that are applicable to what you're doing today, even if you're not working in a product environment or you're not working in kind of like a lean or lean-esque environment. So, any questions?
Well, I work with the BI product team, and I liked your concept of the 5 hows for the KPIs, because, BI teams always should start with the KPIs first. So I thought that was a very interesting way to look at key performance indicators.
Thanks.
So that's what I'm going to bring in.
Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yeah.
I'm guessing anyone that's using this methodology, they have to be using something like continuous delivery, or do people pair it sometimes just with not using continuous delivery, and therefore they just take a long time to get the changes into production?
You don't have to do continuous delivery. Like, for example, the A/B testing tools like Optimizely, you can, again, the changes that you make, Optimizely will kind of take a copy of your CMS and then host that on Akamai. So your actual product doesn't really change, but then you do kind of have this stuff floating out there in Akamai.
And that's where the analysts are just doing basic configuration, when I want to see configuration change to test the different A and B options? Or?
Yeah, so those changes are then hosted out on Akamai. So like the analyst will have access to seeing the results. But if you want to make sort of bigger, substantive, like workflow changes, it does require a little bit more kind of, yeah. Any other questions?
Well, I think it's very interesting that this ties in very much with, not just the user experience, but this whole behavior-driven design movement that's actually very associated with the lean startup, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
This is not so much a question as there's a resource here in the area. There's a meetup group called Action Design DC. And
Yeah.
we specifically deal with how do you get people to, how do you write software to get people to do something. So it's very much behavior,
Yeah.
how do I modify
Yeah.
behavior through my interface design.
So it's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually, well, you'll see it on the next slide. So I run the monthly meetups for Product Camp DC, and Steve Wendell, who runs Action Design, he spoke about how to change user behavior in product development. So yeah, you're right, it ties in.
A little bit of a presentation that they had about a month ago about a It's a startup that's doing phone conferencing, but through a
Speak.
yeah.
Yeah.
I guess you would. And a lot of the same themes came through and how they tried making different changes to just different elements of the user interface and measured the response. And then, and one of the things that I thought was interesting was that they said you really have to focus on a really, really small number of KPIs. If you have too many KPIs, you're going to get dragged in too many different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they focus, and their KPIs changed over time. Initially, it was all about conversion. How do we get people to sign up once they see our screen? And then after they had a certain minimum number of people signed up, then they started talking about, now how do we get people from using the basic free version to the it's a freemium model to the paid premium model. But that only became the second KPI once they had sort of achieved their goal on the first one. So they did sort of these phases of different KPIs depending on where they were at in terms of their market share and in terms of their
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example. Thank you. Yeah.
Along the same idea or on the same topic, and this might be a little outside the scope of this, but do you know if there have been any scientific studies on like psychosocial linguistics and behavioral patterns in relation to morphonic or syntactical changes in microcopy? As in the particular linguistic mannerism of the text of a button, like changing submit to support Haiti.
Yeah, so the things that I do know about text are that, one, kind of the call to actions, people actually read those and they are important, and that is very important, but generally speaking, people don't read a lot. I think that Steve actually talks about users as being like 5-year-old babies or, drunk users, because nobody reads anything. People just clicking buttons all the time. That's sort of how users interact with systems. And so the kind of people read the text on a website or anywhere really in an F-shaped pattern. So they'll read most of the first line and some of the second line, and then they'll just sort of scan the left bar. So trying to put, if you do have text, put that most important part right up in front. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I'm going to make it actually really. I have a very interesting for your user story, how you write user story, very interesting. You have hypotheses and you have measurements.
Uh-huh.
My question is, how do you determine that measurements part? I mean, when you guys write a user story, and is a bunch of people say, hey, we're going to go this measurement, and that's what your decision made, or are you based on marketing result, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, my sort of idea here would be that kind of the product owner is going to be the one responsible for at least sort of defining how that's going to be measured, and then you need to work with kind of the team to help figure out how you're actually going to get the data. But then at the end of the day, the single ringable neck is going to be that product owner for like, were you able to deliver on that?
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yes. The nobody is commercial product, right? I was thinking about the government's budget will be very hard to measure.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be more challenging, but I do think that it's possible to sort of think creatively about what data that you do have and how that's going to be measured. I think that sort of like stakeholder engagement is going to be more important, and even if it's not 100% kind of quantitative data, even if you're getting qualitative data, that's better than nothing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if you can talk a little bit about the lessons learned from the USA Jobs site, which relates to your presentation today.
Sure. So USA Jobs, I think they learned a lot of really good lessons sort of after the fact, and then they really kind of got into that sort of, we hadn't even really discussed any sort of lean principles at the time, but we did get into the pattern of, like weekly we would discuss, okay, what were the help desk tickets? What are users complaining about? What showed up on Facebook today? And so I think that was really important for them to sort of hone in on that customer empathy of how they were using the system. In the case of that 18-month new product development, I can't say that I really have any good lessons learned out of that. especially coming from the government perspective, because there were contracts involved, and we had to actually take one site down and put another site up the next day. So that it is very difficult. And that's part of the reason why I'm really emphasizing kind of focus on learning how to do this in market, because that you already have that customer feedback, and so you can continue to iterate a little bit more effectively than trying to like put brand new wireframes in front of somebody at Starbucks. So let me think more. I'll see if I can come up with some juicier stories for you guys.
Did you do user testing during the 18 months?
We did. Part of the problem, again, the government has a lot of restrictions around how you talk to the public. And so USA Jobs it's like one part B2B2C business model, because the agencies are actually paying for USA Jobs, whereas it's the general public who uses it. And then it's kind of one part two-sided market, because you need both agencies to put jobs into the bank, and then you also need customers to come in and look at the jobs. So we only had access to sort of that agency pool of HR specialists. So part of the challenge that we had is that we were getting feedback from those HR specialists, and we were asking them questions of, so what do you think about this as a user? But they were sort of giving us their HR opinion of like, well, here's the data that I'm going to need from this applicant. And so what the consumer wants to put in, they don't really want to put in their social security number, for example, but maybe the HR specialist needs that information. So really trying to reconcile that experience was challenging, because we were hearing that feedback, but it wasn't necessarily the right feedback. During the, what's that?
It was only half of what you needed?
Yeah. Yeah, and we were kind of asking the wrong people to give us guidance on what they wanted the product to do. So.
I'd like to just share something, and it kind of hit me here too. You mentioned that when you do user research, make sure you ask like broad questions.
Yeah.
What do you feel? What do you think? Versus showing them a wireframe and all that. And that's a lesson learned for me too. We've been doing this thing for some time, a few months now. And the first time we went out, it was the opposite of what you were saying. We go in with a wireframe and then specifically ask questions about that. Then and this is where it helps to have like a trained user researcher, because if you're not familiar with the topic and you just take an engineer and a PO who doesn't know this per se, then you're going to get very unhelpful answers kind of.
Yeah.
So it helps to read up on user research, or at least have somebody along who's done that before.
And so even with, I'm working on a different product now, but even for products that have like really good training and really good training materials that are out there for their end users, I don't know how many users actually use that. So instead of sort of sitting down during those wireframes discussions and saying, okay, so then you click here and then do this, how does that look to you? If they can't intuitively figure it out, you probably have a problem. So.
I have kind of a broader question. I'm curious about how many people here have kind of been exposed to Lean Startup. Like, I'm not sure how much the Agile community has read the book, so I was just curious how many people have read the book Lean Startup or.
Oh wow, maybe I should have gone in more detail.
No, it was just it was kind of.
I should have asked that question.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good.
And then I have actually a second question, which is, my exposure to Lean Startup and stuff like that is really about building MVPs and learning. But have you, in your experience, have you done a lot more building the product and then kind of measuring based on something, an MVP, or using user stories and user research before you even start? And I guess that's kind of a form of MVP, but I'm kind of curious how you've done either one.
Well, again, I've mostly kind of backed into this with existing products, and so we haven't had a whole lot of building MVPs, pivoting, really trying to flesh this out a little bit more, which is why I do think it's very applicable to larger organizations. But yeah.
Well, but even with an established product that's in the market and has users and a fan base or whatever it might be, when you need to make changes, that's one of the questions that we ask ourselves: is if we're doing something, you might look at something, wow, that's going to take 6 months, and then we say to ourselves, but what's the MVP? What's the thing that gets us some change quicker that might make our customers happier, that might
That's a good point.
Ameliorate some of the problem we're having, that might get better adoption, that might give us more referenceability, whatever it is. Because maybe it's not that 6-month thing. Maybe it's, you can do something that will get you a result in 2 sprints.
Or it's possible that you'll build the 6-month thing and then they'll hate it and not use it. So that's a wasted effort. That's a good point.
The advantage of existing product is where you have probably users, and so you can start measuring how this impacts existing users, or how it increases or decreases and defunnel tests versus something brand new. It's like, how do you know if this is something that's worth trying to build?
Right. Well, we also have an incredibly active user research program.
Okay.
So, I mean, we've got appointments with users pretty much every day. We're out in the schools talking to teachers and counselors. We're talking to students. We're talking to Boys and Girls Clubs, whatever. I mean, we're talking to a wide variety of people so that we're not just putting something out there that seems like it should work to us, but, won't attract a 16-year-old or a guidance counselor or whatever it might be.
What's MVP?
Minimum viable product.
Oh,
So for those of you that aren't familiar, the minimum viable product would be like you figure out what is the minimally acceptable number of features that will sort of satisfy a problem or that a user is experiencing, and so that the Eric Ries book that I mentioned earlier, he goes into greater detail about how you might implement some of these, and there's some really creative solutions. Like he talks about the I think it's like the Wizard of Oz MVP or something like that, where it's like the man behind the curtain. So like you don't actually build a product, you just have a pretend product and see if they actually like it, or stuff like that. There's creative ways to sort of figure out and get that user research behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I think my favorite example is the Dropbox, where
Yeah.
they actually, instead of building a product, they built a website and a video
Yeah.
and had people sign up, and that was their MVP. The number of signups proved to the investors that this is actually something worth investing in.
Yeah, and actually, I think my favorite part of that about that Dropbox story is that they embedded a really nerdy joke because they were targeting a very specific early adopter audience. So, they wanted a very kind of tech-centric person to get this product going. So, it's a good example.
I read an example recently about a company that makes a free EHR product, electronic health record. It's web-based, cloud-based. They offer this to doctors' offices, and the doctors get the incentive payments from the government that don't actually have to pay anything, and I think it's ad-supported or something like that. So they get a good number of people signing up, and then at some point they seem to have made a change that seemed relatively trivial. You couldn't copy something from this part of the product to the other part of the product, but apparently it destroyed the billing workflow of their doctors. And if there's one thing that they don't like, it's getting the billing workflow disrupted. And that led me to think you really, really have to have a quick rollback strategy in place in case one of your hypotheses turns out not to be wrong, but catastrophically wrong, because on those forums people were saying that this is not, back to how it was on Monday. I'm out of this product because you're destroying my revenue. I haven't been able to bill for 3 days, and people were. So, is that generally a good idea that you need to be able to roll back if you really get it wrong?
Absolutely. And so, like for example, the A/B testing tools, like you can turn off the test right away and revert back to your control if you need to. But that's definitely, especially for government and larger companies, that's going to be a bigger concern. Like if something is mission critical, you need to be more careful about how you're dealing with forms. I have a hypothesis of my own, so I can't wait until I find the right product to do this on. But I have a theory that if you eliminate sort of useless field forms, that you're going to get better data quality. And so I'd like to see how I could implement that somewhere.
Might I suggest Obamacare?
All right, there we go. I'll go ask.
So the reason I mentioned that was there was an article out this week that the application for Obamacare was 15 pages. Wow. Right?
Yeah.
And so people complained about it, and I think they're down to 5 or 6. But I'm still thinking 5 or 6, seriously? I mean, what are you asking in 5 and 6 pages?
I don't know.
And
That's a good question. I wonder if they do have better data quality now.
so part of it was you literally had to prove as part of the application process how much money you made. So you had to attach tax stubs and stuff. Seriously? For healthcare?
I don't know.
Subsidized, yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you that my online health insurance application was more than 5 or 6 pages long, so I would actually consider that an improvement.
Yeah.
Well, I guess on that note, so anyway, I'm pretty sure you guys will get a copy of these slides, but so please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and come to Product Camp DC. We have a meetup page, so actually their big event is May 11th, so it's a big unconference. People will vote on different topics. You can come and present. So that's happening really soon. Just a couple of the books here that I referenced. So thanks. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody. That's it.